So, good afternoon, Dr. Brian and Sasha. You're most welcome to this episode of The Handshake. And Dr. Brian, I spoke with you before on another podcast I used to do, Asking the Hard Questions. And Sasha, I really bowled him over with the hard questions, but he was more than well able for me. I I would just like to say thank you so much to both of you for coming on board with The Handshake. And for our audience, I will go back and reintroduce you, Brian, and introduce you, Sasha. So Dr. Brian Higley, he's President and CEO of Building Blocks of Excellence, Change Management Specialist, Leadership Management Consultant, and Executive Coach and Educational Consultant. And you're so welcome to The Handshake, which is a podcast which seeks to emphasize the importance of connection, networking, collaboration, and the power of the human, particularly in this age of AI and the galloping pace of AI. And you're joined today, Brian, by Sasha Monaco, who is the first author of Super STEAM Team, a hero-directed tour through the principles of productivity. And I believe you're pursuing a doctorate in psychology, having first been introduced to Dr. Brian by a Dr. Martin Haystacker at the University of Florida. So you're both so welcome, and I'm really excited for a very interesting conversation with you both. So our discussion will center around two elements. One, the paper titled H2O-Centered Education, Helping Educational Excellence Flow More Freely. And secondly, then the book, The Super STEAM Team. So have I missed out on anything, Dr. Brian? Would you like to add to that?
No, I think you were very, very thorough. I just want to say it's really nice to be back with you. It was really fun on your other show, and I'm looking forward to another really good conversation.
And this time round, Dr. Brian, you've done a load of preparation in having already introduced my themes to a whole team of people who have contributed. So by way of thanks to them, and I know you'll be referencing their work, I'm going to mention them now. Ali Bravo, former head TA for the H2O teaching team at the University of Florida. Jessica Baumgartner, leader H2O Presentation and Outreach Division, Appalachian State University. Dr. Brooke Burrows, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the same university. Tyler Favier, head TA of the H2O teaching team. Tony Hutchins, co-leader, Success and Graduate School Division. And Charlie Moore, who is president and owner of Mooresight. Sasha, yourself, Sasha Monaco, first author of Super STEAM Team, a hero-directed tour through the principles of productivity. Valeria Prudenov, I hope I got that right, International Affairs BS Psychology, former head administrative teaching assistant for CLP 2001. And then for the benefit of our listeners, I just want to mention, may I take the opportunity to refer to Valeria's commentary on LinkedIn around a H2O-centered podcast, of which you, Brian, were one of the panelists, and the lively discussion that ensued as a result of her post there on the H2O-centered coach. And so many people who had undergone the training and the course came on, and a lively debate ensued. So perhaps our listeners might like to follow that. And John Spence, one of my own contacts, managing partner, John Spence LLC, top 100 leadership speakers, and author, Awesomely Simple, Essential Business Strategies for Turning Ideas into Action. And number 10, Isabel Van Siekel, co-leader, Success and Graduate School Division at the Appalachian State University. Some of my pronunciations are a little bit dodgy. I think I got them fairly okay, though. So in this chat today, Dr. Brian and Sasha, I approach it in a thematic approach. So by way of introduction, your STEAM framework introduces 5 key factors: social support, time perception, enjoyment, accessibility, and motivation. So for the benefit of our unfamiliar listeners, those who have not yet been inducted on the H2O STEAM journey, could you share your research journey briefly with us and give us a bit of background of what has taken you on this pathway?
Oh, yeah. I'll try to keep it short. I could probably fill the whole podcast up with the answer to just that question. But maybe one way to summarize it is in my own training as a counseling psychologist at the University of Florida, I started to become interested in common factors that either help people feel satisfied with their lives or that block people from feeling satisfied with their lives. And very long story short, what I ended up finding is that people who follow an H2O-centered path, H2O standing for help to ourselves and others, which really aligns, I think, really well with your handshake theme, shaking hands with other people in H2O-centered ways. They tended to have more both productivity and peace of mind. Whereas people who followed what I call the dry path, as opposed to the H2O path, had less productivity and less peace of mind. H2O stands for help to ourselves and others. Dry stands for doesn't reward you and me, with you and me being one word because, again, along the lines of your handshake theme, those who don't think about both benefiting themselves and others tend to have less productivity and less peace of mind. And there are a bunch of different sub-acronyms that I think we'll probably get into that I don't want to go on for hours and hours. But that's a nice little, I think, nutshell of where I started and where I am now.
Excellent. And what attracted you to this whole theme session?
I was so inspired by the framework, particularly because I actually took the class at the University of Florida where we were taught the H2O framework, and we were taught to go into each element of STEAM and apply it to our current goals and missions. And it honestly just really helped me. And I think when Dr. Haysacker approached me about possibly creating a book for children about this, I was just so excited to be able to pass that experience that I had on to other people, whether it be the children themselves, their parents, or their teachers. So I think the accessibility aspect of it and the fact that it really is for everyone and it is so research-based and helpful, that's what drew me to it.
And I'm sure it has become an integral part of your own practice now as you progress through your doctorate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I use the elements all the time. I actually sometimes will pick up the workbook and start filling it out myself because it really is so helpful.
Excellent. Yeah. So on our first theme, your H2O model promotes deep human interaction and learning. In an era dominated by AI and automation, how does your approach cultivate meaningful mentor-student relationships that technology cannot replicate? Dr. Bryan.
Yeah, so you had mentioned all the different contributors to the answers to these questions, and I want to make sure that all of their good answers get into this podcast. So what I thought I'd do as often as possible is start my answer off maybe with a quote or two from some of these contributors.
Sure.
And then kind of piggyback off of what they said. Would that be okay with you?
Absolutely, but this is just a starter question. I'm going to delve deeper then into the sub themes. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. So at a large thematic level, I think so much of what we do within the H2O model is grounded in the attitudes that Carl Rogers discovered to be so helpful to individuals. And the way I think about those three attitudes is with the acronym, and I think I mentioned earlier, be ready for a lot of acronyms today. But one of the acronyms we talk a lot about in the H2O model is the GREs. And a lot of people, including Sasha, know the GREs as a graduate record examination. That's the test you have to take to get into graduate school. But this is a different GRE. And what I'd like to tell people is this kind of GRE is a lifetime test. Every moment of your life, I think you're being tested in terms of the GREs that I'm going to talk about right now. The G is genuineness. The R is regard. And the E is empathy. And I think, and I don't propose to be an AI expert, but at this point, I think what differentiates human beings from AI is that human beings are able to empathize with each other around a common human experience. We all know what it's like to be a young child as a human, as a young adult, and then those of us who are older know some common human themes. So I think centering what we do around Carl Rogers' GREs is something that at least currently AI can't replicate. That's the only people who can give the GREs to each other are human beings.
And the question of trust has come up in relation to people working with and interacting with AI. And I think it comes in very much to my first sub-question here, in which you will, I would say, reference Jessica Baumgartner and John Spence, who did feedback quite extensively on this theme. The collaborative grading process that you describe in your paper requires significant trust between the educators and the students. How do you build that delicate interpersonal dynamic, especially with students who've experienced primarily traditional assessment methods?
Yeah, here I'm going to go to a couple of quotes from some of our contributors, and then we can piggyback on it if we want to. But here's a couple of great quotes from Jessica. When I asked her to think about this question, here's what she wrote, quote, "An educator who collaborates with the learning team, traditionally the class, to guide learning through their interests opens the door to trust. Trust is built when others see that your words align with your actions." That would be, this is a side note for me, that would be aligned with Rogers' genuineness. He sometimes called it congruence. "A great educator will exemplify that, and their students will recognize they are a valuable part of the team and be more open to collaboration in any form, including grading." And then John Spence wrote this that I thought would be good for us to consider as well. "Students engage more fully when they see grading as a tool for growth, not judgment." And here's a little side note for me. I have had numerous discussions with students over the years about how learning and assessment is often associated in their mind with fear and shame and guilt. So we do a lot of counter conditioning in our classes that when we do collaborative grading, it's all about interest and growth and just getting better. We don't need the guilt and shame and fear stuff. Back to John Spence's answer, quote, "By creating an environment where students feel safe asking questions, sharing concerns, and making mistakes, we help them develop the confidence to improve. When grading shifts from a top-down system to a shared experience," another side note, I love that terminology, grading as a shared experience. Back to John now. "Students just don't trust the process, they trust themselves." So those are a couple of quotes from some of our contributors that really, to use Sasha's, something that Sasha's talked about throughout our work process together, it just lights up my heart to read those kinds of quotes from such incredible people.
And some of the proponents of agentic AI in education would say that AI is an asset in that it can hone in on exactly the individual, their strengths and what their needs are at any one time, and assess them and adjust the pitch of the education to suit that individual. What would you say to that, to those who are promoting AI in education?
Yeah, I think any technology, including AI, maybe I'll talk about the two different acronyms that we often use. H2O, we already talked about, help to ourselves and others. The other acronym we use to help people distinguish between non-H2O practices and H2O practices is DRY, H2O versus DRY. DRY standing for doesn't reward you and I. I think we might have covered that a little earlier too.
Yes.
I think if any technology, including AI, can be H2O-centered, and we just talked about how the center of H2O is GREs, genuineness, regard, and empathy, and how empathy, at least right now, from what I understand, is only really something that we can give and take from fellow human beings who have been through the human experience. As long as it's grounded in the GREs and H2O, I think, like all technology, a book, whatever, that it's going to help with the learning, change, and growth of the individual. If we start moving away from H2O and onto dry, it would mean that we're not really using the empathic connection of human beings. We're just going with what AI says. And that leaves out that sort of that empathic trust experience where you start to feel like, well, someone's just kind of controlling me, and who's programming the AI? Is the AI really programmed for my?
That's a big question. Yeah.
It's hard to trust without that person that's there that you feel like, well, this person, although they're not the same as me, they have a general sense of what it's like to be a human being in my situation.
And that takes me nicely to my next question. Your research highlights the power of authentic classroom communities. Can you share a story about how student relationships and peer support networks evolved differently in a H2O environment versus the traditional setting?
Yeah, here again, I've got some good answers from our collaborators, and we can piggyback off them if we want. So Tony Hutchins says, yes, in an H2O environment, students are encouraged to work together to create common goals and work toward them as a team throughout the entire course, whereas in a traditional setting, there would be minimal collaborative work. And I get that a lot. It's another side note for me. I get that a lot in students when they come into an H2O-centered course, is that they talk more in that one course than they've talked in their entire college experience. Back to Tony. In a previous class, students who were more outspoken would volunteer to speak up in class for those who felt anxious or did not want to for personal reasons. Here's another side note. We get a lot, and back to the empathic connection we were just talking about. We in H2O classes get a lot of feedback from more introverted students that they really appreciate the empathy with them. Because I think a lot of times people mistake introversion for something being wrong with people. You know, if someone doesn't talk, something must be wrong. The science is really clear that really just more extroverted types get their energy from interacting with other people. More introverted types get their energy more often from sort of just looking within. So one of the things that emerges in these H2O classes is the extroverts pair up with the introverts, and they both communicate with each other and with the class in ways that they're comfortable. Back to Tony, this builds trust between students and got many more students to participate in the learning activity. In a traditional classroom, this would not be considered the norm.
So a balance is achieved. A balance is achieved between the introvert and the extrovert.
I think balance is a really nice word for all kinds of different personality types and and students with all kinds of different interests. So we probably want to keep coming back to that concept of balance. I've got another really good answer here that I wanted to run by you. This is from Valeria, and she wanted to build on Tony's response. She said, or she wrote, in our team, we foster a culture where STEAM levels are consistently raised through various social support networks. And we'll get more and more into STEAM, I'm sure, throughout the discussion. But the S in STEAM stands for social support. And STEAM is the individual form of H2O. So STEAM is individual H2O. We have another acronym we'll probably talk about, WATER, which is group H2O. STEAM for individuals, WATER for groups. The S in STEAM stands for social support. Back to Valeria's quote, we emphasize uplifting relationships, address any draining dynamics, and ensure everyone has the time and the tools they need for success and well-being. And I'm so happy that Valeria brings both of those up, success and well-being. Back to that concept of balance. Sometimes people will give up their well-being for their success. And oftentimes in education, people are encouraged to become imbalanced in that way. And we don't promote it that way at all. Back to Valeria. By enhancing enjoyment and motivation, we cultivate an environment where passion and enthusiasm thrive, both at work and at home, even during challenging times. This holistic approach strengthens our team dynamics and enhances overall productivity and satisfaction.
And Sasha, have you had experience of this in your work, even now in working maybe with groups or in doing your research towards your doctorate?
Yes, absolutely. So it's interesting because I have a multidimensional view of steam and water because I was a student of steam and water. I was in a class learning about it. I was working with brilliant professors who were working on this framework. And in that regard, I felt something that really sparked me that Dr. Brian just said, which was success and well-being at the same time. And that, to me, has both comfort and motivation wrapped into one. And so that's what really inspired me about the concepts. Now, as someone who's working with them to kind of spread the message of steam and water and H2O, I have been like visiting classrooms and being able to see children actually use the material, which I'd love to talk about in a later part of the interview. But yeah, just being able to see them light up at the material and kind of adopt a sense of agency, like they can design their own lives in the way that they want, which is exactly what Dr. Brian was just saying.
Brilliant, brilliant. And the paper discusses education as a meaningful adventure that unfolds through human connection. How do you train educators to shift from being knowledge distributors to becoming what you might call adventure guides in student learning journeys? So maybe I'll start with you, Sasha, on that one.
Yeah, so for that one, that makes me think about a part of the H2O framework that I remember learning about, which was getting buy-in for your mission. Kind of like going to the group that is going to be socially supporting you, or maybe like doing the mission with you, and kind of presenting it to them in a way that allows them to become excited about it also. And I saw this when I went to visit a school last week. There was a portion of the workshop where the children were encouraged to create SMART goals based on like a broader motivation that we had identified that they would like to create for themselves lives. And what was most exciting, even though it was exciting to see the students write their own goals, I was watching the teacher walk around the room and see all these goals and start to talk to them about how she could help them with them. And so this group buy-in, this group excitement that like, look what we all can do, not just look what I can do, look what we all can do.
Agency and ownership. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. That's a lovely example. And Brian, I know that Valeria and John had something to say about that as well.
Yeah, they have just such incredible comments. So Valeria wrote, the first thing that comes to mind is co-creating and leading toward mission activation. That reminds me of what you and Sasha just talked about. We're co-creating these exciting goals that lead us to this exciting adventure of our mission in life. Back to Valeria. If I were to define co-creating in my own terms, I would describe it as a process that brings together the collective effort of individuals, leveraging their diverse skills and perspectives to a shared vision toward a common goal. And to me, that's really what the whole exciting adventure is all about in education, both in terms of the broad mission of education, is help people to see their lives as a meaningful adventure, and also each different meeting. So Sasha just talked about some meeting with some kids. I guess I'll talk a little bit about a meeting with some college students that I recently had. To me, every so-called class is really just an adventure toward something that's truly interesting, something that I think we've been talking about lights us up, you know? And what I tell students every day is I'm not here to just talk at you or ask you to memorize certain things and test you in some uninteresting way. Every day that we get together, we're on a journey to find something interesting, to find something that lights us up. I also want to now go into something that John Spence wrote that I think relates to this as well.
Yeah.
Educators, education at its best, this is John Spence, is not about memorization, but transformation. Someone who strives for excellence, not just in knowledge, but in character. When educators act as guides rather than gatekeepers, they don't just teach. They lead students on a path to lifelong curiosity, ambition, and achievement. And to me, that's really what meaningful, interesting education-centered adventures are all about. I think John nailed it.
Yeah, I love John's mindset, and I love what I can envisage him bringing to the workplace and to the workplaces that he works with.
Yes.
So looking at your STEAM factors, particularly the social support element, how do you see these human-centered principles reshaping not just individual classrooms, but entire institutional cultures and communities? And I know that Tony Hutchins and Charlie Moore and John had more to say on that one as well.
Yeah, they have such good stuff. I'll say the way that I think about it, and Teresa, I think you and Marty and I talked about this in our last podcast. The way I like to summarize it is really transforming entire cultures from that dryness, that practices, thoughts, different activities that people do that don't reward you and me, that really might be just about me and not you. Or in some cases, I'm just thinking about you and not me rather than all together. Moving from a dry culture to an H2O-centered culture. So here are some quotes from some of these great thinkers. So Tony wrote, by putting an emphasis on these human-centered principles, we can better connect and understand each other by better understanding ourselves. And this is crucial to meaningful learning. Little side note. One of the things that Carl Rogers and other people have been writing about, Carl Rogers is a really well-respected psychologist who was the founder of person-centered approaches to therapy and education and really living. One of the things he pointed out way back in the 50s that I think we're still struggling with is that so many people go through what I think about as a more dry educational experience where they really don't even get to know themselves. So oftentimes I'll ask students in the first week of our time together, what are your most important objectives in life? And oftentimes students will say, no one has ever asked me that. What's most important to me?
So they struggle with putting it out to replying to that question.
Well, no one has even encouraged them to think about it, which is just amazing. So here's Charlie Moore, a quote that I think relates as well. Charlie wrote, this is so good. The spirit essence of collaboration isn't a feature that comes later in life, but at the very primary stages of socialized learning, and is transported throughout the length of communal existence. I love that term. Whether that is in education, corporate, or social structures. And I think Charlie nails something there about changing cultures, changing the culture of families, changing the culture of classrooms, changing the culture of workspaces into a communal existence. I think so often people are trained to think, well, the family is about the leaders of the family, the parents, and then the kids do what the parents want. When we get to education, we do what the teachers want. When we get to the workforce, we do what the leaders and managers want. And I think Charlie's term, communal existence, I think if we change the culture from just top-down, dry kinds of interactions over to a communal experience that's more H2O focused, that will be changing the culture at a micro level, every individual and family, and then at the macro level as well.
And I love how John Spence has the lovely overview. He doesn't work in silos in his thinking. He sees the interconnections. And at the heart of every great organization, whether a classroom, a business, or a community, is a sense of belonging. People need to know they're valued, supported, and cared for. They need to feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves. This is where the social supports become transformative.
Yeah, the essence team. Yeah. And I love his next paragraph in there. He's not afraid. One of the few organizational consultants I've come across, not afraid to talk about love, the L word. So in his next paragraph, he says, running a great business isn't just about the work. It's about people working together. It's about human connection. It's about moral love. Our profound responsibility, I love that term, because it's profound. Our profound responsibility to care for one another's well-being and success, back to balance. Success, but not at the cost of well-being. That's, to me, the essence of H2O. Back to John. Moral love means respect, encouragement, and genuine concern for others. Makes me think of Rogers' genuineness, regard, and empathy. Back to John. It means showing up listening, and offering help without hesitation. I love that phrase too. Help without hesitation. Help to ourselves and others. It means creating spaces where people feel safe, seen, and supported.
Yeah, brilliant. It reminds me of a recent conversation I had with Chester Elton around this whole thing. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful thought. It brings it
Yeah,
together nicely. Yeah,
beautiful. And I like that term beautiful. I think you talked about a change in culture. I think when we change cultures from that dry way of being to the H2O way of being, it is really beautiful.
sure.
It lights people's hearts up, like Sasha mentioned earlier.
So moving on to theme 2, as I pulled it out, the undergraduate research laboratory as a method of enhancing science practice integration. And I'll quote Dr. Brooke Burrows, the assistant professor of psychology at the Appalachian State University. As a recent colleague of Dr. Higley, learning about and appreciating his H2O-centered approach to education, I found natural and corresponding themes within my own teaching and research lab. The CoLab, that's Community-Oriented Learning Lab. Fundamental to my work is a sense of mutual benefit, collaboration, and shared insight, whether this be in the form of policy by proximity, which solutions to our complex social challenges are often best engineered by those closest to the problem, or through research by relationship. That is the most critical and useful research findings for applied interventions require communication, trust, and transparency. So here's how we can thoroughly or thoughtfully bridge the human and scientific elements while advancing both. We look at it from 3 angles, but due to time constraints, etc., we'll just look at the first one here today. But the 3 angles would be focus on intrinsic motivation, secondly, community-driven science, and thirdly, integration through practice. So let's take a look at the focus on intrinsic motivation here today. So the paper emphasizes that students excel when driven by genuine curiosity rather than external rewards. So for the Handshakes podcast, this suggests exploring how scientific rigor can emerge organically from human curiosity and real-world problem solving. What do you think, Dr. Bryan?
Yeah, the first thing I think about, and there are some quotes I also want to get to, but the first thing I think about is the research that backs up what it is that you just said, Teresa. And I think of self-determination theory, and that they discovered that, excuse me, that intrinsic motivation is a function of 3 things. And I always remember it. I told you there'd be a lot of acronyms by the acronym CAR, C-A-R. And I always think about what gets our intrinsic motivation engine revving in our car: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And so I'm always thinking about those 3 things, no matter whether I'm working in a family system, education system, or work system. How can I promote competence? How can I promote autonomy? How can I promote relatedness? And this gets a little bit to what you mentioned earlier about a culture shift, because I think the more we get involved in helping people become more competent, become more autonomous, and become more related, like that handshake notion that the show is all about, the more likely it is we'll have intrinsically motivated people. So I've got a quote here from Charlie Moore. Most, if not all, science is the byproduct of human curiosity. This is evident from an early age, such as asking the simple questions pertaining to nature. Why is the sky blue? Where do babies come from? Why do bees have wings? How do birds fly? And any number of burgeoning questions that allow the inquisitiveness of humanity. There's so many good phrases here. The inquisitiveness of humanity to flourish and find value within our existence. So really, I think the scientific endeavor is really all about not just telling people what to do in a top-down fashion, or just to follow orders or whatever, do what I say because I said it, but to allow, to use Charlie's terms, the inquisitiveness of humanity to flourish and find value within our existence.
And he also has a lovely sentence there. It is the quest to pull from chaos and the unknown that provides the fuel for our problem-solving inquisitions.
Mm,
And in a world that is so uncertain and
yeah,
so on its head with change these days, that is a
yeah,
deep thought there.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it really gets to the importance back to Carl Rogers' genuineness, regard, and empathy, the GREs. I
Mhm.
think so often people, at least when they come to me in research methods courses, they think about science as just these strict things that you have to do. And in some cases, just like with learning in general, they associate science with fear or shame or guilt or, boy, I don't know how to think well enough. And I think back to that idea of culture change, if we can
Mhm.
change the culture from people associating both learning and science with negatives like guilt, shame, and fear, to inquisitiveness and curiosity and interest. And then in these crazy times, finding some kind of pattern out of the chaos that we can really hang our hats on.
So, Sasha, building on that richness of exposure that you have enjoyed, how do you seek to promote CAR, the competence, the autonomy, and the relatedness in your work?
That's a great question. So I think what excites me most about this is exactly what Dr. Higley was just describing about the idea of, do you want to focus on fear or do you want to focus on excitement? Because they're both very strong. Fear is strong. Fear, drives people to do all kinds of things,
Yes.
but so does excitement. And excitement, in my opinion, stronger as a motivator. And so I think promoting that is what's best. Like in the book, the children are directed to think about what they enjoy. The narrative is that this second grader, Oliver, is tasked with writing a book report, and he originally chooses a book called The History of Toothpicks. And one of the superheroes is like, why did he choose that? There's no way he enjoys that. And so I think pushing people towards what excites them, I think, is something that sounds so simple, but people really don't realize is so powerful.
You need it for true engagement, even in terms of in the workplace, to heighten engagement, to get people interested, ask for their opinions, and get them involved. Heightens
And
that.
that gets back to your theme of culture change.
Sure.
So many cultures, so many family systems, education systems, and work systems are cultures of fear.
Mhm, mhm.
And one of the best and I think most healthy ways to change that culture is to change it from that culture of fear to, as Sasha said, to a culture of excitement and enjoyment, which is the E in STEAM.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Very good. Yeah. So I will just move on to theme 3. And the authentic scholarship emerges from authentic relationships. A quote directly from your paper. Let's explore how the lab builds trust alongside scientific rigor. So, your paper describes students shifting from expert-centered content distribution to collaborative discovery. How does building peer trust change the quality of scientific inquiry, Dr. Bryan?
Yes, there's so many ways to think about trust, but one thing that I often talk about with students when they come into my research methods courses is the science mindset is grounded in learning how to trust your own mind and your own five senses. So I think so often trust begins by being able to know that you can, even though nobody's perfect and no one's right all the time, that you can eventually, with the proper education,
Mhm.
trust your mind, trust your senses to, even though you won't always be right or other people might have a better answer, but in the end, that your mind and five senses are trustworthy. So I think helping people to really think about and experience education that helps them to trust their own minds and bodies is the first step. And then I think Charlie Moore, again, has a nice quote about how science can help us trust others. Charlie wrote, "Science becomes science through the process of peer review and replication,
Mhm.
thus relying heavily on the process of fairness and ethical validation. In each case, a researcher's theoretical construct and body work is open to scrutiny whereby the advancement of science is dependent on the trust bestowed on others that have a common interest in seeking scientific truth. Trust is part and parcel to scientific discovery. This is another thing, that's the end of Charlie's quote. This is another thing that students in more traditional education systems comment on a lot in my courses, because it is a communal experience and it's not just about me telling them what's right and what's wrong. They oftentimes have to adjust from appealing to my authority about what's right and what's wrong to starting to appeal to the entire community. So one of my practices is when students ask me a question, I usually engage in the Socratic counter questioning of, well, where in the textbook do you think we could find a good answer? Or can you all find a good article from a peer-reviewed journal that you think could help us find the answer? So it's not them asking me a question and then some authority saying, here's what's right, write it down and I'll test you on it. It's instead saying, this is a really good question. Now let's engage our entire learning community and then engage the scientific community through what they've written either in textbooks or in scholarly articles to try to find the best answer together.
So Sasha, have you found in your interaction with peers or even with students and with your research work that students are becoming more open to asking questions, that they're gathering self-confidence?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that, because I was actually just going to interject and add to Dr. Higley's answer. In my graduate education specifically, I am finding that curiosity is rewarded. And when curiosity is rewarded, it grows exponentially in a productive way. Some of my favorite professors that I've ever had, I remember specifically that one of their most used sentences in the classroom was, "That's a great question. That's a great question." Even if you don't feel like it's a great question when you're raising your hand, because it can be a little bit intimidating to be curious sometimes. But yeah, that's an excellent motivator. And me personally, it grows my motivation tenfold to be more curious. And something that, now that we're, talking about research and curiosity, I wanted to share something that Dr. Haysacker shared with me. It was actually the first lesson he ever taught me, the first time I ever met him, which was when we were going over possible research topics for my honors thesis. And he told me, research is me-search, meaning the questions are inside of you and you can bring them out, put them on paper, and deliver some really awesome results to everybody else.
So yeah, there's a hint of the car there, isn't there? The competence. And the confidence that comes and the affirmation that you get then and the encouragement. Yeah.
And I would say the A in CAR too, the autonomy to pursue the things that you yourself are interested in. In our lab with Dr. Haysacker, students pick their own topics and we help them as sort of guides on the side pursue their own topics. Whereas in the traditional lab, typically students have to pursue the researcher's interests and just do what they're told.
So it's about finding relatedness as well, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. One of the best ways, speaking of shifting cultures, to relate to another person, to do the handshake, to connect with another person is to show them that you are genuinely, this is back to Rogers, the GREs, that you're genuinely interested in what they autonomously choose. You're not here to serve me. We're here to serve each other. I'm helping you to learn the scientific process, and you're learning the scientific process through something that interests you that you chose autonomously.
Very good. You mentioned lab members openly discussing barriers and failures. How does this vulnerability paradoxically strengthen scientific rigor?
Yeah, I've got so many good quotes here, but before I give you those, I'll say in most of my courses, students, as they co-create what we're going to be doing in the class, they come up with some kind of mechanism where they can identify their barriers and then work together as a learning community to overcome them. And at the end of my courses, I typically ask them, what are the most important things that you learned? And a huge percentage of students comment on these overcoming barrier sessions where they say, not only did I did I come up with ways to overcome my barriers, it was so nice knowing that I wasn't the only one who was worried about this or that or the other thing. So another way to create relatedness is by being vulnerable in that way. I'm struggling in these 3 ways. Does anybody have any ideas about how I might be able to overcome those struggles? Having said that, Tyler's got some good stuff here. Tyler wrote, discussing barriers and failures promotes honest self-evaluation and combats quote unquote blue skying, resulting in us being able to move forward effectively. And blue skying, for people who don't know what that means, it means just trying to come off like everything's great or that you're great rather than being honest about what's happening. Back to Tyler. It also encourages accountability and minimizes logical fallacies we experience when justifying mishaps. So just owning up, this is me now, owning up to things that didn't work out or that you're not doing, and then figuring out why you didn't do it rather than acting defensively. Back to Tyler. Ultimately, our process encourages scientific rigor by fostering critical thinking and the development of solutions grounded in empirical evidence. Boy, that's music to my ears. Solutions grounded in empirical evidence. For example, one common fallacy minimized in this process is confirmation bias, where we might only focus on evidence that supports our assumptions rather than addressing failures openly.
And the lab emphasizes student-led recruitment and selection. How does letting students choose their collaborators affect research outcomes compared to the traditional faculty selection approaches?
Yeah, I think back again to CAR, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. This makes me think of Albert Bandura's work and other research scientists on self-efficacy and self-confidence. One of the ways that we communicate to the people that we work with that we feel like they're competent is that we share responsibility for what's going on in the classroom, in the lab, workplace, wherever we're working, family. So one of the things we like to do is make sure that as many things as possible are collaborative. So it's not just the so-called leader selecting who's going to be on the team, what the family's going to do, or what we're going to do in the workplace. It's everybody in a communal way working together to decide who do we want to have join us in the community. Tyler's got a good quote here again. Tyler wrote, student-led selection provides us with self-determination. There's self-determination theory coming up again, and autonomy, the A in CAR, which reinforces our intrinsic motivation. This guarantees our commitment to our projects and collaborators and increases overall participation due to buy-in. Team ownership and buy-in is the T in water, H2O for groups. It also ensures that our research is driven by genuine interests, the G in GREs, genuine interests, and emphasizes alignment, which is the A in water, with our personal goals, which enhances creativity and collaboration. And he put an exclamation point there. I thought I should say that because he's got a lot of energy and he's really excited about all the things that he wrote.
Yeah. So I just move on to my final question in this area. Your model suggests that genuine human connection precedes scientific breakthrough. Can you share an example where strengthening relationships led to unexpected research innovations? And I know you're going to be drawing on scholarly articles from your undergraduate labs on this one.
Yeah. So much. This is back to the culture shift, I think. When we go the dry route, the route I sometimes think about as conformity, compliance, and obedience, top down, just do what I say. So much of that is related to power and control. And so much of power and control creates trauma. And so I think when we go a different way, that collaborative, competence, autonomy, and relatedness way, not only do we see intrinsic motivation, we see healing. And I often talk about H2O. It normally stands for help to ourselves and others. But I think so many people in their family, education, and work systems have experienced the trauma of dry processes that help to ourselves and others is often healing to ourselves and others. So I think when people do try to work with people in that collaborative, competence, autonomy, relatedness fashion, it's not just good for your motivation, which is the M in STEAM, by the way. It's also good for your healing. So I've got a couple of quotes here from one of our scholarly articles on our research lab. Erica Alvarado Gomez is a quote from her. The teamwork aspect of the lab is really important because it allows me to communicate my ideas efficiently and openly, knowing that my fellow lab members will provide new perspectives on those ideas. And this is something that makes me think of Carl Rogers' work again. One of the things he found in therapeutic settings is that it can be just naturally therapeutic to just have somebody who is genuine, regardful, and empathic listening to you. And when I read Erica's quote there, I think of the GREs, genuineness, regard, and empathy.
And I'm sure, Sasha, you would find that exact thing reflected in your work, in your labs, in your research now towards your doctoral, your doctoral studies.
Absolutely. I think that especially in higher education, when you're able to really pick exactly what you're studying, that autonomy factor really speaks to me currently. And just, I think it also brings in social support a lot, which is the S in STEAM. Just feeling like people are interested and have that buy-in in what you are interested in. Kind of that kind of honestly reminds me of exactly what we're doing right now. Just it excites me that the three of us are getting together to talk about something that we all think is cool.
Very good, thank you. And moving on then to the undergraduate research laboratory as a method for enhancing science practice integration. You have some very good quotes there. Megan Turner, for instance, and Katie Warman have both contributed well there.
Yeah, Megan's quote, and again, I echo what Sasha just said. It's just great getting together, just talking about these sorts of things. So I'm feeling a rise in my STEAM every moment that we talk with each other. So this is a great example of what we do in our family education and work systems when we do H2O. I'm having the experience now. So Megan Turner's quote: "Before being accepted in the lab in the end of my sophomore year, I was vaguely considering applying for a master's degree." And that vagueness gets back to what we talked about earlier, where oftentimes students aren't asked, well, what do you really want to do? What's really important to you? So they have these vague feelings, you know. Back to Megan. "As a senior, I am now applying for my PhD in IO psychology." And this was a few years back. So this was what she wrote a couple of years back when we published this. "I do not believe that I would have made the decision to apply for a PhD if I had not been introduced to this lab." So a real life-changing experience that the research helps us to predict. And Kathy's quote is, "Through this lab, I was able to demonstrate enthusiasm, research knowledge, and an interest in psychological research, which attracted various graduate programs that I applied to." And I think people, just like what Sasha talked about, and I think what the vibe that you always get when you interact with Sasha, that when you are able to tap into your intrinsic motivation for things, including research, you become more attractive to other systems who really want people who are pursuing mastery in their areas to come to your programs, because mastery often does require intrinsic motivation. I think even if people aren't conscious of these things we're talking about, subconsciously they know, if I want to mentor someone to mastery, I've got to have an intrinsically motivated person to do that.
Which takes me nicely to the next question, the next area of respect. You know, the paper discusses scientifically sound communication built on respect. How does establishing psychological safety change the types of questions students are willing to investigate?
Such a great question. And the answers, I think we covered them already previously. So this will be maybe a review or a summary, but when people come into our classrooms or our labs and they're used to the more traditional ways of doing things, they're not typically ready to collaborate. And what I mean by that is I will ask them questions like, what are you interested in? What do you want to do today? And those kinds of questions for people who haven't been asked those sorts of things, they show sort of like a shock response. Like, you actually care what I want to do? You actually care what it is that I want to research?
Sure.
So once they get past that initial shock, I think they start to recognize that this will be a place where the entire community, led by the leader of the community, will have a genuine, regardful, empathic interest in what they're doing.
Mhm.
And there's a quote here from Tony that I think gets that across. Tony wrote, "Establishing psychological safety can encourage students to speak up about what actually interests them instead of waiting on an instructor to tell them what they should be learning and investigating," that top-down approach. Back to Tony. "Students are not worried about their ideas being shut down by the educator or other students. This creates a more honest and trusting environment where real ideas that actually motivate students can be shared." And I think that is another thing related to a shift in culture. In the top-down culture, I think so many people, when they're asked something, they're sort of trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to say so the leader rewards me or at least doesn't punish me? And in these H2O-centered classrooms or families or workplaces, people, instead of looking outside of themselves for what am I supposed to say, they look within and think, what do I genuinely want to express? And
So
I
when
think
in a respectful environment, they're more willing to be vulnerable because they know that they won't be shut down.
yes, and I think the more they get attuned to the environment, that it doesn't even feel vulnerable anymore to express yourself. I think once people get used to, whether it be a family, a classroom, or workplace, once they get that trust that the leader is genuine, regardful, and empathic, and is interested in competence, autonomy, and relatedness, there's no real threat to expressing yourself anymore. So you're not vulnerable. You're just you.
And Charlie Moore says, establishing an environment of psychological safety unleashes levels of curiosity and supposition that is unbridled and intended only for the advancement of science. Rather than cautious examination, there is a thorough and full examination of the science without the presence of personal or superficial intent.
Charlie is really big on, he talks a lot about getting underneath the surface. And in so many organizations where it's top-down, fear-based, things look okay on the surface, but when you dive underneath, there's lots of trauma going on, lots of fear, lots of guilt, lots of shame. And so when we do that culture change from the more dry environments to the more H2O-centered environments, once you dive deep under the surface, you find that there is alignment. It's what Carl Rogers would call congruence, that what's appearing on the surface is also what's happening at the depths. And so I think that this culture change helps us to move from surface, everything looks good, but once you dive deep, lots of turmoil, to a family system, an education system, and a work system that what you see is what you get, whether you're on the surface or at the depths.
It's a real art, though, isn't it? And it's an art that you learn to have the confidence to delve deep, and then the students lean into it because they feel they're in safe hands.
It's really one of the reasons why we love working in all these systems, because it does take training, it takes support. It takes someone who has been through these sorts of processes and knows the landscape to help you through it. The best parents do it, the best educators do it, and the best leaders and managers do it. We just need more people doing it.
How do you resonate with that session?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I was just going to ask if I could interject about exactly what Dr. Higley said, but also about the respect element. On the topic of helping spread this framework, I think that the work that we're doing is to try to get it into the hands of the people who need it, which really could be anybody, but the part that I understand best is the child side, like the classroom side. And I think that when you get a bunch of these books for your classroom and you hand a child this book, you're non-verbally saying to them, I respect you, I respect what you want to do, and I want to help you get there. And I think this could be the mechanism by which children realize that they're supported by the adults in their lives, and that their goals and their missions are valid and exciting. So I think it's just I think it's a wonderful concept, and I think it could help so many people.
Great, thank you. So takes me on to theme 4. And this is our final theme before we move on to talking to you, Sasha, more in depth about the book. Okay, so scientific thinking as a tool for human development. So we're discussing how research skills enhance personal growth. So Dr. Bryan, the paper discusses how scientific rigor helps students overcome self-protective focus. Can you share a story where learning to embrace complexity and uncertainty led to personal breakthroughs?
Yeah, there's just so many stories. Again, I could have a whole podcast and probably a whole podcast series just about these stories, but Valeria shares one that I think is a good summary of the kinds of stories I've been hearing across the year. So Valeria was pursuing her master's, and it was going along with some bumps in the road. And then eventually she found that she had to redo the entire thing in a really short period of time. So here's what she wrote about as she moved through all of that uncertainty and eventually completed her master's thesis. She wrote, "What kept me going through it all was STEAM. I knew when to ask for help, that would be the social support, when to pause, I think that would be the motivation, because when you're tired, you need to rest to get your motivation back.
Yeah.
And when to start fresh. And I think that's the E in STEAM, enjoyment. I know when I feel fresh, that's when I most enjoy what I'm doing. Through this experience, I learned that embracing complexity and uncertainty is not about having all the answers." And this is a little side note, because we never will. Back to Valeria. "It's about trusting the process," back to trust yourself, trust others, trust the process, adapting to challenges, and finding new ways to move forward. And to me, that new ways to move forward relates to accessibility, the A in STEAM, getting access to more information about how to overcome your barriers. And I think that's a beautiful little excerpt about how that helped Valeria get through her uncertain times.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. Now, you write about intrinsic motivation replacing external rewards. And how does this transformation in what drives students change their career trajectories and life choices?
Here again, I've just got so many different stories, but Allie has a good quote that I think encapsulates a lot of them. She wrote, "I plan to complete a dual track and finish my master's with dual certifications. I'm excited to embark on this journey where I get to contribute to 2 passions of mental health counseling, as well as working with and advocating for people with disabilities. Down the road, I hope to pursue my PhD in counselor education and teach at a university level, a love I found through my position of admin TA of personal growth," which was an H2O-Centered course that Dr. Martin Haysacker taught as well.
Mm-hmm.
"I cannot say thank you enough. I also want to express my openness to collaboration in the future!" Exclamation point. This is another aspect, I think, of the H2O path and the generous regard and empathy and trust that it generates is people often want to stay in our community even after they graduate out of the official kind of community. They're still with us. I discussed the elements of STEAM in my graduate school interview, and I'm always implementing principles of H2O in my professional and personal life. So I just get so many of those kinds of stories that once students get into communities where people say, "What's really important to you? What are you passionate about? What do you want to be competent at?" Oftentimes they go from making a plan that was about someone else's vision for them, whether it be a parent, an educator, or a leader, to an intrinsically motivated path that they created out of their own interests, out of their own passion, and out of their own relationships.
And I think Valeria gets that wonderfully well in one paragraph that I had identified there. I like to believe that my journey is a testament to the power of intrinsic motivation in shaping career trajectories and life choices. When individuals prioritize learning, self-improvement, and personal fulfillment over external validation, they cultivate a deeper sense of satisfaction and purpose. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
It's beautiful. That's another one of our themes, the beauty of an H2O-centered path, as opposed to I think about it really as sort of a dark power and control or dry path. Beauty versus darkness oftentimes comes to my mind when we talk about these things.
And the STEAM model emphasizes social support alongside technical skills. How does combining emotional intelligence with scientific thinking create more effective professionals?
Yeah, I think we've touched on this in a variety of ways already, really. When I think of emotional intelligence, I think of the GREs and CAR. I think emotionally intelligent people are, by definition, genuine, regardful, and empathic. And when you're genuine, regardful, and empathic, you're interested in competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And we've already talked about how competence, autonomy, and relatedness gets people back into what they're interested in and intrinsically motivated, and how those intrinsic motivations help people to access curiosity and excitement. And the more curious and excited people are about the things they want to research, the more likely it is that we'll get more and better science from more people. Valeria, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Charlie Moore, I think, gets exactly what you said in one. He said emotional intelligence creates constructive humanistic pathways for understanding and developing relationships. Emotional intelligence is scientific thinking. It provides for us the understanding of the connectivity of thought to emotions, which may be shown in our behaviors. It also makes us aware of the bifurcated process, expression and intake, by which behaviors may influence our emotions and thus our thoughts. And understanding the natural impact of our emotions enables us to adjust to challenges, create relationships that are accountable and nourishing, enlist our curiosity, and search for truths. These are all qualities that should be present in our roles as professionals.
Yeah, I think so much about competence, autonomy, and relatedness, and genuine regard and empathy is about becoming really a scientific thinker about how best to interact with ourselves and others. Back to that acronym, help to ourselves and others. If you're going to be maximally helpful to yourself and others, you've got to be able to think like a scientist, really identify, well, what are the variables that are most helpful to me? What are the variables that are most helpful to others? And how can I maximize the variables that are helpful to both me and others and minimize engaging in variables that are not helpful to both me and other people?
So I suppose finally we'll come to that notion of community as catalyst for discovery, examining how group dynamics drive innovation. And a STEAM in action is what I call Isabel's quote here. She says, group dynamics drive innovation in our class through collaboration in our small groups and as a whole learning team. Working together allows us to share these diverse perspectives, challenge ideas, and refine our thinking. This teamwork encourages creative problem solving, helping others discover new insights and develop innovative solutions. Sometimes one of us may come up with a great idea when others are struggling, which benefits the entire classroom. In other words, those with higher STEAM levels can help support and complement those with lower STEAM levels, fostering collaboration and collective success. Yeah? So your lab...
Yep.
Your lab model shows students generating their own research ideas rather than following a professor's agenda. How does this communal approach to discovery challenge traditional academic hierarchies, and what unexpected innovations have emerged in your experience, Dr. Bryan?
Yeah, again, I think we've touched a bit on this previously, but Isabel has another good quote on this. She writes, allowing students to generate their own research ideas challenges traditional academic hierarchies by giving us more ownership of our learning, team ownership, the T in water.
Mm-hmm.
This communal approach values our perspectives and encourages creativity, leading to unexpected innovations. Collaborating with peers rather than just following a professor's agenda fosters diverse ideas, problem solving, and unique solutions that might not emerge in a top-down learning structure.
Mm-hmm. So, and the paper also mentions that lab members hold each other accountable for achieving team goals. And how does this peer accountability system produce different results compared to the traditional top-down approach?
Yeah, here I think Jessica has a really good answer. She writes, the peer accountability system encourages trust, transparency, compassion, and collaboration between group members. These things are important when all is going well and when the team encounters hiccups. With established trust between group members, everyone feels comfortable respectfully sharing their thoughts and opinions, knowing that their teammates will be listening and responding with compassion. I like that phrase, responding with compassion. It is through trust, transparency, and compassion that allows meaningful collaboration to happen. Peer accountability also allows for more creativity in brainstorming and problem solving because it supports interest-driven learning, which is another component of H2O-centered learning. When group members and their interests and goals, both individually and as a team, are aligned, the A in water, everyone is more inspired, fulfilled, and productive.
Which takes me nicely to my last question in this section before we go on to analysis of the book and to talk to Sasha a little bit more in depth on the book. Your model emphasizes scientifically sound communication within the community. Can you share a specific example where careful group dialogue led to a breakthrough that might have been missed in a more individualistic research setting?
Yes. So I want to make sure I don't miss anybody's.
That's Dr. Brooke Burrows. She has a lot to say on that.
Yes. Right. So good. Thank you. I'm scrolling through so many people's answers here to try to make sure they get represented. So Dr. Brooke Burrows, she writes, working in a more applied context of monitoring and evaluation, my doctoral research zoomed in on an intervention program, the Justice Ambassadors Youth Council, which brought together New York City youth involved with the criminal legal system with government representatives holding power in the same system, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, etc. As part of an 8-week educational seminar, participants collaboratively worked together to identify current groups in criminal legal policy, to find research supporting possible alternative policies, and ultimately pitch their proposal at a final graduation ceremony. The careful dialogues of these most impacted by the criminal legal system with the suits and tie folks in the positions of creating or implementing policies led to profound moments of shared insight and mutual recognition. I love that phrase. Profound moments of shared insight and mutual recognition. One such policy breakthrough, Project Restore Bed Study, PRB, a preventative community-based approach for addressing gun violence, public safety in the neighborhood, Bedford, I don't know how to pronounce that, Stuyvesant in New York City, was not only proposed, but took on a life of its own. Implemented by a team that included formerly incarcerated and gang-involved individuals in collaboration with university and district attorney office stakeholders, PRB supported 30 young men connected to rival street crews, locally affiliated gangs, who were impacted by cyclical and retaliatory gun violence. due to the participatory nature of both the intervention's origins and implementation, in which many community stakeholders had a voice in its design and creation. The program now serves as an important model of a successful, holistic approach to public safety.
What's coming to mind, and I think is a good wrap up on this whole area, is the breadth of application of your whole model across so many. It's not just within the education system, it's out there in community, in society, and across the workplaces. And in thanking your contributors, it is just amazing how all of their opinions come together. They're so individual, but yet collectively resonate so well.
Yeah, to me, I think of it all as impact in family education and work systems from a bunch of different perspectives all along that H2O theme. Help to ourselves and others, and STEAM for individuals, water for groups. I think every single one of those answers, although different, they're all harmonized around those acronyms: H2O, water, STEAM.
And Sasha, what do you think at the end of all of this discussion?
Yeah, I think we're just really getting to that idea of how this is so applicable to so many different people, so many different communities. And I love the way Dr. Higley puts it about how STEAM is individual, water is group focused. And so really it can apply to anything. And I think, especially in the classroom setting, that's particularly how I think of STEAM and water being applied, and being able to see that firsthand and see the children get excited about that is invaluable to me.
And of course, my war cry always is, it all starts with at the base in the classroom, in the education, because those in the classroom are the future. They are the future of community, of society, and of the workplace.
Absolutely. And on that same note, there's I think, we may touch on this a bit later, but it's very cyclical. Like parents who learn how to create SMART goals and work in a way that's excitement based and not fear based, they'll likely pass that on to their children, who can pass it on to their children and the people around them. It spreads like wildfire in a good way. And it's just an incredible way to pass on these, like Dr. Higley said, these solutions that are grounded in empirical evidence.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for a wonderful conversation in that area.